Hi, thanks for joining me today. Waiting for people to come in here before I get started. I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm going to be working on today, so I'm going to need your help to help me decide in a little bit. But I guess first I wanted to show a couple things before I get going with that. And number one is this, which is, I don't know if you've seen it in my feed today, but it is an original watercolor that I will be giving away to someone within the next week and a half. So check my feed if you want to know how to enter that and to win this little painting. It's got two little foxes in there. I started off with this one and he looked so lonely, it was just like that. He needed some companion, and so the second little fox came into being over there. All right, secondly, what I've got here is this painting. I just finished this one today. It's what I've been working on all afternoon. And it is super fun with these duochrome pigments. It's extra shiny. It looks blue in some lights and gold in others. Yeah, it's really, really a pain to photograph or to scan. But I think I spent as much time trying to get those to look right as I did on the actual painting. But yeah, that is going to be available on Everyday Original in about 5 days. I think on the 11th. I'll put links for all this stuff later on at the end as well when I archive this video. So if you're interested. All right, so what to work on today? I have two options. I've got this turtle painting. Coco Rachel says that she's going to make me want to buy more art supplies for her bugs. What kind of bugs? Do you mean like the wood burning ones that you're doing? Anyway, for what I've got here, I've got either this painting, which is the sea turtle that I was doing a little bit of stuff on last week. If you joined me or watched the archive, I was doing this little section, and I actually have not touched this painting all week since last Monday. See, that's why I've got to do these streaming sessions, because it's kind of hard for me to get working on this stuff. And somehow when I'm talking to all of you, it helps me with just sitting down and doing some actual painting. So thank you, first of all. But yeah, so this is option number one. I could do a little bit more painting on this. I think that what I'm working on at this point would be this upper portion and the seaweed and stuff, and this flower, which is going to be another one of these blue blossoms. And second option for what to work on today would be more of my butterflies, because I want to make more of these. They are so much fun for me to do. And I have a few more cut out that I was planning to work on at some point. One of the things about these is I have painted them as accurately as I can to the real things, both on the upper and the underside of the wings. That's the underside of this guy. And it even has a little proboscis. Look at that. Although one of my friends pointed out that I have the proboscis curling the wrong direction. So I'm going to have to fix that on the next one. And so what's the vote here? What do you want me to work on? The painting or butterflies? Let's see, two votes for butterflies so far. Anyone else have an opinion on that? This is the underside of an emerald green swallowtails. The painting, let's see, that's 2 votes for butterfly, 3 votes for butterflies, 1 vote for painting. Anyone else want to say? Maybe I could do a little bit of both. Oh, now we're tied. This isn't helping. You're supposed to help me make the decision, not make it harder. All right, let's do a little bit of the butterflies, and then maybe I'll do some of the painting as well after. How about that? Does that sound good? Oh, or we'll do the painting first. Okay, we'll work on this a little bit. I was kind of leaning towards the butterflies just because I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this currently. And so yeah, let's go for at least half an hour with this one then. Probably seaweed is what's happening over here at this point. And let's see, what have I got? Am I planning to do a demo for the butterflies on Patreon? I was planning to do actually a little write-up at the very least for a walkthrough. I've been taking some photos of the process, Rachel, so yeah, I think I can do that. I might be able to even get that in for this month because I don't think I have a planned thing yet for the walkthrough. So yes, answer is yes, I can. But I'll get to that also today. I'll do maybe like half an hour of this, and we'll do the second half hour with the butterflies. And as always, as I'm painting here, because sometimes it's not going to be super interesting for you watching this as I just slowly feather in dry brushing details and shading very, very gradually. So ask me any questions. You can ask about anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be about this painting even, or about the specific techniques that I've got going here. So we can talk about anything while I'm doing this. Brittany is asking if this is watercolor. Yes, indeed it is. I primarily paint with watercolors. Most of my pigments here in this little dish are Daniel Smith, and that's generally my go-to for most of my pieces is Daniel Smith. I have some occasional others that I add in for various specialty items. Sometimes I count specialty items as being just some really, really pretty blue colors because I'm a sucker for pretty blue colors, pretty bright blues. So I will go seeking other brands for that, as well as granulation and duochrome and all these other kinds of random goodies. So I will stray. I'm not dedicated to any one brand for all my needs. But yeah, my primary palette, as I said, with this is Daniel Smith. This blue that I've been in love with lately, actually there's two blues here, are Roman Sesmal, and they are ocean blue and cobalt teal. I also like some of, oh, why can't I remember the name of that company now? It's a Japanese paint company. Who can remember this while I'm having a momentary brain failure? Rachel, Marla, do either of you remember what I'm thinking about? The other company that I like the blue for, the one that I use gouache with. Holbein, yeah, thank you, Marla. I knew I could count on you. Holbein's another one where I really like some of the blues that they offer. Rachel, this painting is mostly Daniel Smith, and I have not done any duochrome in this piece. I think for my larger paintings, for the most part, I haven't yet done something that would involve a lot of duochrome because it's so hard to get a good digital rendition of it because of how particular it is with how the lighting is going to change the way it looks. And so with gold leaf, I've found ways to accurately photograph. And by accurately, I mean like it's, you know, I scan the pieces that I do, but I also photograph them because I feel like when I'm trying to do the digital version, what I want is something that is as accurate to a representation of the physical thing in front of you as I can get. And so with the duochrome, it is tricky, and I have to fiddle around digitally with a lot of the colors to sort of get some sort of representation of what it would actually feel like to see the physical thing, because I don't want a buyer, especially of my artwork, to buy something because it looks really good online, or maybe they don't buy it because it doesn't look good online in digital form, and then to be surprised by the actual thing when they receive it. So my primary goal is to fiddle with the files until they can most accurately represent the experience of being in front of the piece itself. And with gold, I've posted a few tutorials and things about how I do that process of photographing and scanning and combining them. And I feel like I've come to a place with that where I'm pretty comfortable that what is represented in the digital file is a pretty good version of the piece. But I'm not quite there with the duochrome stuff yet. I know Jon Losel was in the channel here. I don't know if he still is, but he also does a lot of gold leaf and gold reflective stuff. And I've always been curious about how he goes about with his digital versions as well, because he's got an amazing, well, the digital files look amazing, and you can really sense that gold and that gleam in them, which you don't get if you just do a pure scan of a piece. This brush that I'm using is a handmade brush by Tracy Levinson, and again I will link this later on in the notes when I archive this video, or if someone else who's a regular of mine remembers what the Instagram is, they're welcome to post that as well. It's Levinson Paintbrushes, I think. Yeah. Let me just look it up really fast. Yeah, there we go. Rachel says, didn't I have a creamer pigment blue that was really lovely at one time as well? Yes, there was a Ploss blue, which I think looks a lot like this cobalt teal though. And this is a lot easier, and I can be lazier with it because I don't have to take the pigment and do everything myself with this. It's just right here. So what I'm doing here with this piece, with this section of it so far, is just laying out the base tone glaze of the seaweed. And once I get this layer in, then I can go back and start to pull out the details and shading and highlighting and everything else. Well, highlighting is mostly going to be stuff that I'm not painting. So I'm going to be leaving the highlights as the white of the page, or in this case, I guess it's not very white any longer, but the lighter portions of the page are going to be the highlights. And the shadows are going to be things that I continue to push back as I'm working. So I'm going to be continuing to layer and layer and layer gradual glazes like this over the course of much time, and that's how you start to have depth and rendering of objects and things in a piece with watercolors. Let's see, I'm going to scroll back a little bit to see some of these questions that I have missed. Okay, Marla asks, what prompted me to start live streaming? I don't know. I don't really remember why I decided to start. I think it's something I've seen as an option for a while, but yeah, I don't know. I really have no idea why, but I have noticed that once I've started doing this, though, that it has been actually a motivating factor for me these days in keeping me at least on some kind of painting schedule. And it's not that I haven't been painting all week since I last worked on this with you watching, but I've been doing lots of smaller pieces, and I think I've been finding a hard time getting into the headspace to work on larger and more involved paintings where I have to consider composition and placement of things and coloring the various colors and how everything is going to interact. You know, all the complexities that are involved in larger paintings I haven't really felt up for, but small pieces, I've been doing a lot of those. I've been working on lots of little mini pieces all week long, so it's not that I haven't been painting, because I've probably painted like 5 or 6 little ones in this week. I just haven't touched this one. Let's see, when do you know to paint? When do you know to the paint it's ready? I'm not really sure what the question is there. If you could maybe rephrase that for me and ask it again, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you, Marla, for mentioning the Etcher palette. Yeah, it's a porcelain palette that I designed and initially did as a Kickstarter, and after that went fairly well, Etcher Lab and I have partnered up, and they are the ones that now produce and distribute the mini palette. But it was something that I really designed for myself, my own use at first, and I didn't really anticipate that others would want to use it, and so it was kind of an unplanned thing. Let's see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see some of this finer detail that I'm working on. What is this painting for? Harpy Hippie is asking. This particular piece is part of what I hope will be a series of paintings that will be for my next solo show at Haven Gallery, which is a gallery I work with on a regular basis on Long Island in New York. And my next show with them is actually some time off. It's actually not until 2021, so it's not anything in the near future. But when I'm working on a solo show, I do start to begin the process of exploring ideas and concepts for the overall theme well in advance. Up to a year in advance sometimes is when I'll start beginning the early stages of preparation, because the way I come up with new paintings and I am inspired to work on new pieces is through a sort of stream of consciousness, a visual stream of consciousness of work, of pieces. And I don't do as well with just telling myself, hey, I'm going to do this theme, for example, a sea theme. Although usually I'm much more specific about it than that, and I try to get into the concepts of why a sea theme if it was going to be something like that. But I do like to start with just making pieces, and I'll start doing something, and maybe I'll have some concept or some idea in mind of what I want the theme to be, but I have so frequently found that the paintings just take on a life of their own, and they just begin to the themes evolve and they change and they become their own thing. And so I don't want to restrict myself by limiting things to a set concept so early in the phases of coming up with pieces for a series. And so instead I like to just start working early, and I just begin working on whatever comes to mind and whatever I feel inclined to start doing. And over time they develop their own theme and develop into their own cohesive set of pieces where I can then look at them and say, oh, so this is what the paintings are saying to me, rather than being the one to dictate that right out the gate. So that's just my process of doing work for a gallery. I'm doing not just a gallery, but just doing work that is a larger series and that is going to involve anywhere from 6 to 25 paintings. You know, some of the shows I've done have been 25, 30 paintings. So I like to do it that way. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back through some of the other questions because I babbled for a while and missed a bunch of things. I use, Charlotte is asking if I use hot press paper. Yes, I use hot press, and for the most part, and I just prefer the smooth surface because of the way that I do my sort of very tight rendering. And I like to not have the paper texture interfering with all the little teeny details that I do. So yeah, hot press is my preference. Let's see, what else was there that I missed? C.R. Schilliger is saying, I've been following you for years, and every time I see a new piece, I'm still somehow surprised how awesome it is. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining the live video here. How many years have I been painting in watercolors, and was there a medium I created in prior to watercolors? I have been doing watercolors since, let's see, let me zoom out again a little. I have been working in watercolors. Let's see, the first time I seriously picked up watercolors to use was in around 1999. So I guess at this point that would be 21 years. Yes, I could do math while painting. I started, let's see, so that was, and by serious painting I mean prior to that I never considered watercolor as a medium that I was interested in because it just didn't appeal to me. I thought of watercolors only for doing, you know, floral arrangement type paintings or misty landscapes. And, you know, I do both of those also now, although in my style, not in the style I was even thinking of at that point. But I didn't really consider it as something that I was going to be interested in. And so the first time I sort of began using it in a serious way then was 1999. And when I was in college, you know, prior to that, I was not even allowed to use watercolor in my classes. In fact, the painting teacher told us, go ahead and use whatever medium you like. You're just not allowed to use watercolor. And so, yeah, it wasn't until after that that I even picked it up. And prior to that, I guess I was doing a lot of digital art, and I was doing acrylics. And I decided to do watercolor because I was looking at the way I was working with acrylics. Well, okay, first of all, I was doing acrylics and I was doing digital, and I loved digital, even though it was in its very rudimentary early stages as far as being an art medium at that point in time, but I still adored it. And I submitted my artwork to Wizards of the Coast because I really wanted to work for Magic the Gathering. Because at that point, I still thought that I wanted to do art for games and publication. I thought that that was the pinnacle for me in my career. Well, my then barely even started career. And so because I wanted to do that, I was sending out my portfolio to a lot of places, a lot of art directors, and the art director for Magic the Gathering wrote back after seeing my portfolio, and he said, I like your art, but we don't take digital media. That just tells you how old this was, because nowadays everyone uses digital for publication. And so he told me, yeah, come back to me when you have a portfolio that has some traditional medium. And yeah, it has occurred to me also that maybe he told me that just as a friendly way of saying, you know, come back to me again with more art after you've done some more stuff. But then again, I'm also thinking that he wouldn't have bothered to try to be nice about it, because I think art directors see so much art and aspiring artists all the time anyway that he would have had no problem saying, no, not there yet, just, you know, keep at it. So he did tell me, though, that he wanted to see my art with more of a traditional media application. And so I went off and I looked at my acrylics, and I did some more acrylic paintings. And then I realized that my method of working with acrylics was very suitable to working with watercolors instead, because I liked doing glazes and layers. And so I picked up some watercolors at the art store, at Pearl Art Supply in San Francisco, and they were Winsor Newton's. I remember it was a Winsor Newton Cotman set, which is their student grade watercolors, which are pretty good though. I mean, I don't know now. Definitely the set that I bought back then lasted me a really good long while, and I was using them for quite some time. But I got me some Cotman Winsor Newtons, and I started to do a few paintings. And the first piece that I did, I limited myself to 2 colors, and there was an exercise that one of my professors in our art and painting had us do, where we were to use just 2 complementary colors on the color wheel. So that would be like blue and orange, or purple and yellow, or red and green. And we were allowed to use only 2 colors, as well as black and white. And we were supposed to make a study of a famous painting. Out of that, I picked a Michelangelo painting, and using only those colors though, and to reproduce the colors that we saw in the painting as accurately as we could, or at least if not the colors, then the value. And it was an interesting challenge, and so that's what I decided to do with the watercolors for that first painting. I wasn't reproducing something, I was doing a piece of my own, but I selected just 2 close to complementary colors. It was a golden sort of green and a violet. So true complementary with that would have been violet and yellow, but I edged it a little bit more towards the green end of the spectrum. And I did a piece that was called Dream Catchers. I don't know if anyone here has been following my art long enough that they might remember that piece, but that was sort of the turning point for me with the first watercolor painting that I decided to do. And I loved it. I fell in love with it right from the start with that painting. And so from there I just that's the story. I just started doing a lot of watercolor painting from there on out. And it took a while for me to transition completely away from digital, because I was actually by then doing some work for game companies who had begun to come to me for the digital work, but I began transitioning it over to doing watercolor instead. And over time, I found, quicker than I expected, that companies then began to seek me out for my watercolor look instead, which again was a bit of a risk for me to take, because so much of what was used for games, for role-playing games and in publication, was much more of the oil and acrylic realism, or fantasy realism at any rate, look, and not so much the softer look that I achieved with watercolors. And so it was a little bit of a risk initially, where I was diving into this medium that I didn't really see much of in the marketplace, and being utilized in the areas that I at that time thought were the only avenues for being a professional artist. And so it was scary to do that, and it was also that much more gratifying than when publishers started coming to me specifically because I was doing my watercolors and for the look that I was able to achieve with that medium that was so different from what most of them were seeing being produced. So that was also a really neat and uplifting time when I started to come to that realization that I could actually do whatever art that I wanted to create, and I was going to be able to find an audience for it, and I was going to be able to find people that wanted to see that, instead of having to conform myself into a shape that didn't really suit how I thought or wanted to create. All right, let's see now, what other questions did I miss in this interim? Ah. Oh, the earlier question, I guess, was how do I know when a painting is done? Sometimes I don't know, and I will come to a point where I think I am approaching the end of a painting, and I'm just not quite sure if it's done, and so I'll set it aside and see how I feel about it in a couple of days, and whether I need to continue doing something or changing something. Other times I'll just come to a point where I've decided it's done, and I'll sign it. And I have this weird thing now where I feel like once I've signed a piece, I can't touch it anymore. I can't do anything else because it feels like I'm transgressing. And I guess over the years, it's just I get to that point where I'm like, done, sign, and then I put it aside, and that's it. So I really hardly ever touch a piece once I just go for the signing of it. And sometimes I do that. I'll just say, like, I don't know if I'm done with this piece, but to get it, to exercise it for my brain, I'm just going to sign it right now, and then that will mean that I'm not allowed to think about it anymore. And it works. It really works. I don't know if it'll work for you, but it has always worked for me like that. Let's see, how many pieces do I generally present at a show? I think I maybe glossed over that earlier. I think I said it depends. Sometimes there's group shows, so those would be like 6 or even 1 or 2 pieces. But if it's a solo show, I've done anywhere between, I think 18 was the smallest amount, and the largest I've done was like 35. Oh, let's see. Oh, it's already 6:36. It is butterfly time. So Let me set this aside. And we will switch over to butterfly painting now, because I know a bunch of you were requesting that. We're kind of even a little bit skewed to this painting on the requests there. So let's zoom back out and get this out of the way. And where are the butterflies? Okay, so for those that missed the early part of this, these are what I'm talking about. I'm just going to work on making some more butterflies like this because they are just a lot of fun. And I'll show you how I created the base, which is basically they are cut out of this kind of thin plastic. It's actually, well, I got these laser cut, but my first thought was actually to just grab some of the, what are they called? The clamshell plastic containers that produce comes in sometimes at the supermarket, and just cut those up and use that. But because I wanted to make a bunch, I decided to just have it laser cut to make it easier on myself. And these, so this is what I start with as the base, and then I painted them with black watercolor ground, this stuff. So I usually use, if you've followed my videos or walkthroughs or anything, or seen what I work with, this is what I usually use, you know, transparent and white watercolor ground. But for this, because the base, I want it to be dark, and because I'm using really fun duochrome stuff, which works really well on dark color base, I decided to use the black watercolor ground for it. So I painted them with the black watercolor ground and both sides, and then once it's dry, so these I started a little bit, I just lightly penciled in the veins, because as I said, I'm making these actually accurate to the real things. I don't know why, because I could just make them fantasy butterflies if I want to, but I like to do things like this. And so I penciled in the veins and the basic pattern signposts for myself on these. And then now I could start painting on them. So I wanted to make more like this guy because there were a couple things I was unhappy about with this one. This was the very first one I made, and I hadn't yet figured out a technique to get the watercolor ground on in a smooth velvety texture. I didn't want brush strokes, and so I got a little bit of brush strokes going in on this one, and I sort of figured out better to take a brush and with the bristles that are kind of old and splayed, and I kind of like tap, 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 tap in with the black watercolor ground, about 2 or 3 layers. And so, yeah, so I wanted to do another blue one. That's kind of why I wanted to do this. And I have a few different templates here that I did because when their wings are folded up, they actually are splayed out a little bit more versus when they are flat. And so this one, I think, is one of the ones that are flat. I believe this one, no, that one goes with this. Okay, so that one goes with this, and this one pairs with that as more of a folded up, which I'm not going to fold up right now because that's going to weaken the plastic at the joint there. Oh, and I'll show you what else I use for this. I also use black chicken feathers because they're kind of iridescent and fun. So that's what the little bit of fuzziness is over here. And the bodies are made of just wrapped wire and dabbed on black watercolor ground and then painted a little bit for highlights. But I'm not going to get to that part of it today. I'm just probably going to do a little bit of the painting here of the wings. Wolfelia is the paintbrush you're using now for the seaweed detail highlighting a Levinson. Yes, that is one of Tracy's brushes. And let's see, did I miss anything else? Yeah, and I'm not going to use nice brushes when I'm doing this stuff because the duochrome type pigments they have mica particles or other kinds of glittery elements, and those are the kinds of things that are going to get stuck up in your brushes where the bristles are glued in, and so over time it's going to cause your brushes to splay out. So I try, unless I have a very specific need of using some kind of superfine brush, I actually try to use my older, cheaper brushes for the most part when I am doing stuff like this, working with shiny pigments and things, is what I mean by this. So I've got a lot of shiny things here. These are a combination. There's some artistic iuele over here, and these are I don't know how to pronounce it, iuele. And I use all of them. I mean, not every single one, but I use both for doing these butterflies because there's so many complex shades and colors that are in butterfly wings that I really end up having to use a lot of different things to emulate that. And the one I'm starting with now is sort of a, let's see, it's kind of like a dark ultramarine blue shift to a maroon. And I've never actually seen a blue pipevine butterfly living. I've only seen them in a natural history museum and in photographs, so I have to gauge the color from all the photographs and things I've seen. I would love to see one in person, and I would love even more to attract them to my garden, which I am working on. Actually, I need to make sure that's the front. Oh, this is the back side. I screwed up. Okay, that's all right. Because the back side, underside of these wings are actually still kind of bluish, but I'm going to switch to the other side as soon as I do this matching portion over here. Because the undersides of this particular butterfly's wings are a little bit more muted in tone and not so bright blue. How's the color shift stuff showing up on your screens? Are you able to see this pretty stuff, or does it just look all black to you? Here, let me see. Can you see that? That's really fun stuff. All right, that's drying, so let's shift over to the lower wings then while that's happening. And the lower undersides, let's see, what did I even use for that before? I'm trying to remember how I painted this other one. All right, this is the front side of them, and the lower wings are a bit more towards the teal and blue range of things. So I'm going to be using some of this, which is one of the artistic iuele ones. Ignatus is the name of the colorway. And one of the ways I made sure that the veins were symmetrical on both sides is I did cut out a little template just for this section, actually, the part that I just painted. So I cut out a paper template for that because really that's the only part that I need to use in order to get the rest of it all lined up. So I'm using a little bit of gold now here as well. It's so much fun to use this stuff because it's so pretty. And especially on the black with the way I've applied the black watercolor ground, like I said, just kind of dabbing it all over. And oh, actually no, I didn't dab it. What I ended up doing, I think, was like a swirly motion, like that. I kind of went swirly swirl everywhere, and that's what, after 2 or 3 layers, that's what gives it a nice, really even, velvety texture. So that's a combination of the blue with some of the gold in the middle. And I do have nice brushes that are past, you know, they're good brushes, but they are no longer in their prime. So they don't have that ultra point on their tip any longer. And so I'll use those because they're still actually very good brushes, but I won't be ruining that super fine point that I might need for some of my other paintings and some of the really detailed work that I do. And this one is a color shift that goes from like a teal to a deeper blue. So that's really good for the lower set of wings on this butterfly. At least, like I said, from my assessment of seeing them in photographs, and the one time I was able to see a pinned one. Oh yeah, so I am trying very hard. Well, it's going to be a multi-year project, but I am trying very hard to entice blue pipevine butterflies to my garden, because they require pipevines for their larval stage, for the caterpillars, because that's what the caterpillars like to munch on. And so I have planted pipevine in my garden. I've planted multiple sets of pipevines, and I'm told that it's going to take a couple of years for it to really take hold. So it's a long-term patience game, and then even then, once I get the pipevine established, I mean, I could cross my fingers that some voyaging blue pipevine butterfly might stumble upon my garden, but I'm not counting on that happening. I mean, it might, but they are sort of, I guess they're semi-rare here, and I guess they used to be common, but at least in San Francisco, they lost a lot of their population here because people were not planting enough pipevines. And there is a fellow in San Francisco that has managed to bring them back, at least within that peninsula portion. I'm not sure about over here where I live, which is across the bay in Oakland. But I figure that that will be something, a bridge I'll cross once I get there. I've done the first step. I've planted it. Maybe they'll come. If they don't come, then step 2 will be to find someone who does have a pipevine with the butterflies, visiting them and chewing on them and breeding on them. And perhaps I can snag a few caterpillars from such a person and introduce them to a new habitat over here. So that is my plan, although it, as I said, is a longer term endeavor because it's going to be at least a couple of years before my pipevine is even established enough to house hungry butterfly hordes. Because let me tell you, well, I don't know about these guys, but I do know about the other kinds of butterflies that I have in my garden, among which are Gulf fritillaries. And the Gulf fritillaries love passion vine. That's what they will just chew up. The passion vines will look terrible, but your garden will look amazing because you'll have all these living flowers, living orange and black flowers that are fluttering about in the air all the time. I read online sometimes about people who are enraged about the Gulf fritillaries. Okay, so that was just the main color there, but I mean, I'm going to start blending other things into it. And one of the things I need to do are the little white spots. I want to show you what it looks like there so far. It's pretty stuff. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, I see people complaining about how their passion vines are getting devoured because they don't like how it looks. It starts to look really scraggly. You just got to get a big enough plant before the butterflies find it, because once it gets big enough, then it can support tons of caterpillars. So there are some years where we look out the window, and so this is a white gel pen, by the way, to anyone who does not know what I'm using here. Anyway, I was saying that we look out the window, and there are some years where we will see at any given moment, just in the immediate vicinity of our picture window, at least 10 butterflies in the air, which is so cool. It is really neat to have that. I, for one, am happy to let them nom my passion vine in exchange for that view. So I'm just blending out this white gel pen for the spots along there. The bright, okay, someone's asking which one is the bright blue. The bright blue is, so that one, wait, do you mean which bright blue actually? There's two bright blues. There's this one that I was using, the Ignatus, and there's also this one, which is the iuele, and it's number 5. And I'm using some more of the Ignatus for highlighting things over here, because this Ignatus is more of a sky blue, kind of lavendery sky blue. I'm going to use some gold as well. Ooh, do I ever paint with seawater? I have never painted with seawater. I've not heard of painting with seawater. Joanna Roll is asking me about that. So I'm curious, have you painted with seawater, and what's the benefit of it? And I would also, I guess, wonder if that, well, it would definitely affect, so that doesn't even make sense. It would definitely affect the pH balance, and I guess I would worry about the archival quality of something with seawater, but that's because I do sell my work, and so I have to be careful about things like that. All right, what else did I miss? Thanks for the tip about using older brushes with shiny paint, Elmac said. You're welcome. Someone else is talking about the fairy colors from iuele's. I need to ask her how to say that name of her company. But yeah, I did use some over here on this stag, which has this sort of greenish opalescent shimmer to it that is super cool. Brittany McClarney is saying that she used to work summers in Berkeley. I know that area more than I know my hometown. Yeah, Berkeley's a fun place. I lived there for several years also. I lived there for 4 years. And then I moved to San Francisco for a while because I was in my early 20s, and of course I want to live in the city for a while. So I gave that a try, but after 3 years there, I decided, nope. I prefer the East Bay, and so I scampered off back across the bay to Oakland, which I have been in now for I've been in Oakland longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life, which is pretty crazy to think about. For me, I mean, maybe not for you. So, as I'm painting these, I am keeping the vein lines unpainted. So that's just the black of the watercolor ground showing through in those portions of this, and I am just painting between them. So, you know, same as I do actually for watercolors in general, you avoid painting certain areas. Usually it's because I want light to show through, but in this case I want the black to show through. And I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with these butterflies. I'm doing them almost solely because it gives me a chance to use really pretty paints, and it just makes me really feel satisfied, and they're just fun to do. And I've just been sticking the ones that I have around my studio here, and it makes me happy. So that's the only reason you need to do something, I think, making any art. Since I am a professional artist and I do sell most of the stuff I make, I do always get asked by somebody if I'm going to sell X, you know, whatever X is that I'm engaged in making. And sometimes I just want to do things for myself and just keep it for myself. Happy to share with all of you how this happens, though. Elmax asking what type of water I use to paint. I just use our tap water. Yeah, chlorine has not been something I've given too much thought to. I think that in general, the tap water in my area, though, is fairly innocuous. I know this because I have some carnivorous plants, and carnivorous plants are known for being exceptionally finicky about the quality of the water and what minerals are found in it, because if there's too much, they will just die. So I do have carnivorous plants, and I over and over I always read that about carnivorous plants when I first picked them up, when I first started collecting some of them. And also over and over I heard from many sellers within the Bay Area here that the Bay Area, specifically the East Bay water, was perfectly suitable and would not harm carnivorous plants. And so, yeah, I think that it might really vary from one city to the next, what's in the water and how much chlorine and how much other minerals and other things are in there. But for myself, I've never had any problem using anything other than the tap water. Let's see, anything else? My computer keeps freezing up because I have a secondary screen for looking at the questions that are coming through, and usually that's what I do, but for some reason it's not cooperating today, so I'm having to poke around with my phone a bit more, which makes it tricky. So my apologies if I'm missing questions that someone has asked, and if I don't get to it, feel free to just repeat it. I don't mind. How do I price my artwork? Lucky Clover is asking. That is always a really tricky question. Every artist hates
figuring out how to price their artwork, and I am no exception. But it comes down to a matter of a few things. It's primarily how much time does it take to make a piece, because that's going to be the biggest factor in determining how to price something. It's how much artist hours have gone into something. And secondly, you have to look around at your peers and where you are in your career, because that's going to affect the demand for your art, and so you have to take that into consideration. And the reason why that has to come into consideration is because if you're underpricing yourself, then you'll just never have anything around, and you'll be burnt out trying to create enough art for everyone. So you have to find the balance. And like I said, it's a tricky and hard question, and most artists really hate having to figure it out because there's no definite answer that can be used. There's no real formula. You can't just say, take how much money I want to make per hour and just divide that by how long it took for me to make this piece and blah blah blah, because it doesn't really work that way, and it's a lot of nebulous other factors that come into play, and that is going to be different for each individual artist. So what do you think of that? About this wing, I mean, not about the pricing. So I have some color shifting stuff, some metallic things, some highlighting with the white. That's right, there's like a little bit of white along the rim of these wings that I missed out on. Let's see, Marla's repeating a question from someone earlier. How do you start working with a gallery? That's another tricky question. Galleries, oops, let's see. Trying to get right on the edge over here, because they have this little bit of white, and I'm actually trying to get it over onto the side edge of the wing too. Let's see, galleries, how do you get started with working with them? It's a trick. That's another tricky one. And there are a few ways it happens, but for the most part there is a sort of gallery hierarchy. And so there are galleries that accept artists that they haven't worked with and that are completely new to the gallery exhibition type of scene. And there are some galleries that will occasionally have open calls where they don't normally accept new artists, but they will periodically have a show where they say, hey, all you newcomers, come and show us your stuff, show us what you're made of. And you can submit to those galleries and try to get into an open call with a group show. And then once you have shown with the gallery, then you can start to establish a relationship with them and to work more with them and to be more involved in their future shows. But in order to get to a place where that's going to be a possibility, is you have to prove to them that you are professional and that you can take deadlines and work with them in a reliable way and get them art that is properly framed and properly sized and prepared for the show. And so there's a lot of because there's a lot of it that is a business transaction between you and a gallery. You have to prove to them right out the gate that you are a reliable person, because they work with dozens or hundreds of artists sometimes, and so they need to be able to work with people that they know they can rely upon to work within the time frames. You know, same as working within the illustration industry. And so one of the earliest ways that they're going to measure your ability to do that is that every gallery and every art director will have some sort of submission guidelines for how to send them your art if you are interested in working with them. And it is of utmost importance that you follow those submission guidelines to a T, because that is going to be the first gate that they use to gauge whether or not you are a person that they want to enter into a business relationship with. And so read those carefully and make sure that you do exactly what they say. And if they say that they don't accept submissions, don't send them submissions. You need to wait until they have an open call, or you need to work your way up to that gallery by working with others that do take submissions and that do have a framework for working with brand new to the gallery scene artists. So yeah, the primary advice I would have if you are new to it is look up the information about how to submit, because every gallery and every art director is going to have a different set of rules for how to begin your relationship with them, and so you want to make sure you are aware of exactly what it is. And then once you do have a relationship with the gallery, then you start beginning to show with them and to work with them on other shows and bigger shows, sometimes with group shows that will require that you do more than one piece of art. And over time, as you prove your reliability, you can move up to doing larger solo shows. Let's see. Joanna's asking, can you ever get that super fine point back on a paintbrush if it is lost over time? I have never been able to do so. So I have a large collection of brushes that I have used over time and have deteriorated so that they no longer have that super fine point, but they are still perfectly serviceable for many things, including work like this, where it's a pretty good point on this. Let's see. See, that's actually still a pretty good point, but it's not as fine as it can be. So here is one that's closer to being brand new. Let me see. I don't know if you can even see it because it's more something that I feel as I'm working with them. But the one on the right is the newer one, and the one on the left here is one that has been used a bit more. So it's barely noticeable when you look at them, but it is something that I notice with working with them, just because I do such very fine and close-up detail work. So it's something that I definitely feel immediately when I start painting with a brush. How's that looking? Mangofish says that you have a bunch of beautiful eastern swallowtails joining us this year on our celery plant. The caterpillars were so much fun to raise. Yeah, we've got some, I don't know, I guess they would probably be western swallowtails. I don't know if that's actually what they're called. I'm just calling them that right now. I noticed that there are a lot of similarly looking
yellow swallowtail butterflies, and we definitely have some over here too. They like the fennel that we've got here. That's what I see them on most often. And yeah, the caterpillars for those are pretty crazy looking. They're striped green and black and yellow. And yeah, my daughter like loves. Sorry about that. That is a spam phone call coming through on my phone. Oh yeah, the two blues that I've been using of this set are 14 and 5, and I've been using Artistic Isle Ignatus and the gold and a little bit of Aloha Kai. I love this. Ignatus has kind of a silvery, bluish, lavendery look to it. And we are over an hour right now, but seems like we're still having fun here. By we, I do not mean the royal we. I mean all of you and me. So I think I can go on for a little bit longer. We'll see. I'm not sure if my phone might die at some point because I was not on full batteries when I started this. But I could still do a little bit more, as long as everyone's still interested in this butterfly painting stuff that's going on. Here, let's switch to the upper wings a little bit, just for some variety. Because you've seen me paint one side of this already, so basically I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side there. Pineapple and Peacock asks if I use a finishing coat for my pieces. I don't use a finishing coat for paintings that are straight up watercolor and where I don't have any sort of metallic leaf or anything going on with them. For example, the sea turtle that I was working on earlier. I don't generally have any sort of varnish for that piece because what ends up happening with that once it's done is it's going to be matted and framed and put behind acrylic or glass, and that will protect it from UV and moisture and things. So I don't worry about those. If it has some kind of metallic element like copper leaf in it, then yes, I'm going to seal that because the copper could tarnish over time, and I do that by just doing a varnish spray. Sometimes I use resin as well on paintings. And as for these butterflies, yes, I have been spraying them with a varnish spray as well, just because I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with them, as I said earlier. And I don't want to have moisture get on them and ruin them. And actually, I'm glad that I did spray them, because the other day I had these butterflies sitting on my Sansevieria plants in the corner of my studio here. And and next to some air plants as well, and I accidentally spritzed, because I had the butterflies just sitting in the plants, and I accidentally spritzed all my air plants there with water, because that's how I water them, and then I realized, oh shoot, butterflies are in there. So I am glad that I varnished them before assembling. And I guess maybe next week when I do my next session, I'll leave at least one of these butterflies in its painted state, and I'll show you how I do the bodies and everything else, because it seems like I've got a lot of curiosity from audience about how that is happening. So I'm happy to show that, because this painting is going to take a while longer, and it's not going to happen within the next hour even.
see, what is the pen that I'm using for the white highlights? That is not a repeat question for today. It is a frequently repeat question, but it is a Uniball Signo Angelic. It's a white gel pen. Oh yeah, earlier I was saying about how I make a template for just that little section of the butterfly, and then the rest of it, so that I could trace it, and then the rest of it I kind of freehand drew in, because that's kind of the only piece that I need a template for, because once I have that, the rest of it kind of falls into place pretty logically, the way the lines go outward and arc outward into these little divots along the wings. So I don't really need to have anything beyond that part of it as my template. And at first, for the first butterfly, I was actually just eyeballing and using a ruler each time I was drawing that section, and if you're a little bit off, then it kind of makes the wings look skewy. So that's why I decided to do it that way. Yes, I will show how I make the bodies. I'm going to have to wait until I have this one painted up, but I'll save it for next week, next Monday, 6 p.m. for the next live stream. And I might do what I did again today, which was like half of it with a standard watercolor painting and half with working on this, or maybe it'll be all this. So it depends on how I'll be feeling next week, and if I have a painting that I'm in process of working on. So yeah, join me again next week if you want to see the bodies. And like I said, it's a combination of wire, of really, really thin black wire. It's I think it's 30 gauge wire. 28 and 30. 28 for the legs and the antenna, and 30 for the proboscis, and for wrapping on the inside, which you don't see any longer because it's been coated with black watercolor ground and painted. And then these are some little bits of chicken feathers. When I got to that stage and I thought, I know what I need for this. I need some chicken feathers. And I messaged my neighbor who has chickens, and I said, do you have any black chickens? Because if you do, I want to come raid your yard for some feathers. I'm sure she thought it was a very strange request. She didn't say anything about that, though. Sadly, her chickens were no more because the local fauna, raccoons and foxes, had raided her chicken coop. So I had to go on Etsy and find feathers there instead. So I think that I am going to call it here this evening because I have to go get some dinner. It's been fun. Thank you again for joining me. And if I missed your questions, I'm terribly sorry. Just hold on to it, and you can come join me next week and ask it, or if you want, you can feel free to message me, and if you want, I'll hold on to your question to respond to in my next live session. And yeah, so the next one, I've been doing these at 6 p.m. on Mondays, and you go for an hour. So thank you everyone for joining me today. And I hope you have a nice evening, or whatever time of day it is where you live.